Hello and welcome to Soul Unique. I'm Anu Peter, and it's great to be with you here on this first podcast of Soul Unique. My goal with Soul Unique is to assist you in uncovering, nurturing, and forging your own personal spiritual path. A spiritual path that resonates intimately with you, with who you are, with your unique signature and essence as you navigate your life on planet Earth. In this very first episode of Soul Unique, I'm having a conversation with my brilliant friend, Judy Kitt. And I say brilliant for good reason. Not only is Judy Kitt highly intelligent and accomplished, she also brings a brilliant radiance of warmth, love, and compassion to everything she does. Judy holds a degree in genetics from the University of California, and she spent 11 years in the pharmaceutical biotech industry in research biology and clinical research. And since then, Judy has occupied the position of president of an organization called the Foundation for Mind-Being Research. That's Mind-Being Research, which has been around since 1980. And focuses on building a bridge between science, consciousness, and spirituality. Judy has also been a student and practitioner of spirituality and philosophy for over 30 years, and was guided to the study and practice of shamanism through a series of mystical experiences. She received initiation rites from elders of the Karo Nation through the Four Winds Society, and is a full Mesa carrier in that lineage. So with that, I'd like to say thank you and welcome, Judy.
Thank you, Anya. What a pleasure and an honor to be with you. And thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome, and thank you for being here. As long as I've known you, you have been on your own rich and eloquently navigated spiritual path. And you have to say you inspire me all the time, whenever I see you, whenever our paths cross. So before we go any further, I'd like to cut to the chase here and ask you, what is it in you that ignited the spark of spiritual inquiry and that continues to inspire you on your spiritual path to this day?
You know, I right now I'm taking a class in the Bhagavad Gita, and the instructor, when we were all starting, he asked everyone to talk about their spiritual paths. And there was this thread that ran through. Everybody had been sort of an explorer for most of their lives. And what the instructor just said is, you all are yearning for the divine. And I really feel like I was born with that. I was born into a staunchly Irish Catholic family and raised Catholic, went through a Catholic school through 8th grade. And I wanted to be, I wanted that connection with the divine, right? And so in that, the way I learned it, I was trying to be good. I was trying to be the good girl. I was trying to be meek and, just do all the things that they said that would make God love me, right? Because in that system, the way I learned it, we are sinners, right? We've been excluded from the Garden of Eden, and we need redemption. And so I was always trying to do that. And at some point, I think in my teens or probably in college, I realized that within that system, it wasn't going to happen. There was no, there's a story when Jesus goes to get baptized by John the Baptist in the Jordan River. The skies open up and a dove appears over him, and this voice of God is heard saying, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." And that story always made me cry because I thought, I will never hear that. I just, because even though Christ died for our sins and all of that, we were always told that you're just never quite measuring up, right? That was my instruction, that you always had to be repenting. You always had to be confessing. You always had to be aware of how you were falling short. And so I think in college, I just decided that this was a losing game. And then around that time was the time of the child abuse scandal in the Catholic Church. And I just walked away. I, I thought, no, I can't do this. I don't know what I'm going to do, but not this.
Wow, that's a beautiful story. Thank you. I didn't know that you were brought up in Catholicism. And I love sort of having a conversation about the word divine, which we don't necessarily need to go into here, but I like how you're using divine to identify something greater than ourselves, spirituality, and to identify sort of that pristine essence of the divine, of God, of source, of creator, of infinite universal wisdom and intelligence, whatever you want to call that. But actually recently someone pointed out to me that, well, divine is a religious term, right? That comes out of organized religion. So maybe you might want to, maybe you might want to choose a different term for that. And really I can't think of any other term other than maybe a sentence to try to encapsulate what divinity or divine means. There's no other term besides divine. So I always come back to that as well.
I agree. I mean, it might have some baggage with some spiritual traditions, but I think, you could say supreme consciousness or something like that, but divine just kind of encapsulates it really well, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Just like the term spirituality, I always come back to divine and spirituality, even though I think spirituality has a lot of different meanings for a lot of different people. And as I mentioned in my trailer for Soul Unique, to me, spiritual just means looking at sort of a broader understanding and perspective of existence. It doesn't have a religious or organized religion connotation. Anyway, I also wanted to ask you, can you tell us about one or two of the most memorable, maybe even life-changing experiences that guided you on your path?
So the first one happened in college, actually, when I was I was just realizing it was about that time when I was thinking, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what my spirituality is, but I was a sophomore in college, so I'm like 18, right? Then, and it's just sort of this silly story. It was college, right? There was issues with the roommates, there's issue with boyfriends, there's issues with schools. It's very stressful. I decide to get on my bike and drive to the church, the Catholic church. And I go and I sit. It's the afternoon, all like on a Tuesday. And I go and I sit in this Catholic church and I get on my knees to pray. And my praying is basically this litany of everything that's wrong. It's like, this is happening and this is happening and I don't know what to do. And I was just kind of in my head. And out of nowhere, I heard a voice. And it was as clear as a bell. It was right there. And it said, Judy, receive the peace of Christ. And everything got really, really silent. Everything in my head got really, really silent. And I felt this wave of just tranquility and peacefulness that I couldn't really describe. And a little bit of shock because I thought, who was that? There's nobody here. There's nobody here in the whole church. And I was like, okay, say more. Who are you? What is this? And there was nothing else. And I eventually got on my bike and I rode happily back to my dorm and kind of continued my life. But I can't explain it. I don't know where it came from, but I was really grateful for it. Really grateful for it.
Wow, that's incredible. Beautiful.
I want to tell you another story that kind of set my path in my 20s. When I graduated school, started working, and I didn't have a religious practice at all, I picked up a book to read. And the book was Out on a Limb by Shirley MacLaine. Very famous, right?
Yes.
And I picked it up. I had no idea what it was about. I picked it up because she's a dancer that my mother really admired for her dancing ability. And I thought, oh, a biography. Cool. And so I start reading this book, and it's about past lives and channeling and spirit guides. And oh my God, I could not put it down. It completely opened up my worldview, right? It was just so exciting. And I decided to just read everything that she had written. And in one of her books, she talked about this practice of writing a letter to the universe on her birthday. She would write a letter saying, this is the year I had. Thank you for all these gifts. And for the next year, here's what I'd like. And I thought, you can do that? You can like ask the universe for what you want? And it was close to my birthday, so I decided that I was going to do that. And I started writing this letter to the universe, and I thought, okay, if you're going to write a letter to the universe, what are you going to ask for? And, the first thing I thought, I'd really like a new stereo system, but you're not going to ask the universe for that, right? So I decided to ask for accelerated spiritual growth, which I wouldn't recommend. If you probably know why. Because right after, that was like one of the worst years of my life. Like everything fell apart. Everything fell away. And I recognized, and it culminated with the Loma Prieta earthquake after a year of like everything kind of falling to pieces. Just a couple of weeks before my next birthday was the Loma Prieta earthquake, where the earth was literally shaking. And I thought, okay, enough, stop. I've had enough. But I recognized that the universe answered my request, because everything that I was identifying myself against, this is who I am, this is who I am in the world, this is what I do, that wasn't my essence, right? These roles were kind of falling away. And it was a good lesson. I that the universe is responsive. And I loved that. I was really, really grateful for that.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And that's after the experience you had later?
It was a few years. Okay. It was a few years later after I graduated school. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've got two things I have to say. I mean, one is that Out on a Limb by Shirley MacLaine was hugely transformational for me as well. That was a book that I picked up on my path, and I had been on a spiritual path, sort of a quiet one that was in the background mostly since childhood. But I picked up that book, and it just like opened all my eyes and thought, oh my gosh, there's someone else who thinks like I do, and is having, well, I mean, her experiences were definitely beyond what I was having at the time, but she was sort of curious and investigative and going about it in a similar way. And it just really propelled my journey. So I'm actually hoping that someday I might get to interview Shirley MacLaine here, because I did get to meet her once in person when her stage show came through San Francisco many years ago. And I mean, she probably would never remember me, but who knows? But I'd like to back up and also ask you about, so your experience of sitting in the church and having that voice saying, the peace of Christ, I think is what is, allow the peace of Christ. Is that what it was? Receive. A Christian or a Catholic might listen to this and say, well, then why aren't you still a Catholic? Or why aren't you still a Christian? And, well, I have an idea of what you might say, but I'd like to see what your answer to that is.
It's a good question. I hadn't really thought of it. I think the institution of the Catholic Church is what I walked away from, right? I am really drawn to mystical traditions of a lot of different faiths. The ones that I feel like are closer to direct experience of the divine without mediators and without someone telling you how you have to be. I think it was in the I think it was in the 80s when Pope John Paul II came to San Francisco. Do you remember that? Um, he went to San Francisco, and I remember they were interviewing Cardinal Ratzinger, who became later Pope Benedict. And he had nothing good to say about American Catholics. He said, "You American Catholics think that this spirituality is like a buffet, that you can just take what you want and leave the rest. And I'm here to tell you it's not like that. You have to take it all. You have to accept the doctrine as it is without question." And I thought, oh, that's not true. That's not true at all. You know? Yeah, I think it was just the institution that I really wanted to walk away from. And honestly, why am I not still? I don't consider myself a Christian or but here's the thing. The Christ consciousness, I don't when I think of receive the peace of Christ, I don't think of Jesus in the man, the person. I think of the Christ consciousness that evolved um what we might call like fifth dimensional consciousness, right? That is not dependent on a single being.
Yes, I'm with you exactly. I think, I mean, that's what I imagined. Just you might answer something like that, and that Christ consciousness existed before the being Jesus, and still exists afterward. He is a being that achieved that state of consciousness and awareness, and he still embodies it, I believe. But there are other beings, and he himself said that we all have access to that state of consciousness as well.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah, and it's not just reserved for the Christians or the Catholics. It's available to everybody. So Christianity doesn't have a hold on Christ or Jesus or Christ consciousness. It has its own sort of inroad to it, which, I think can be beautiful for many people in their own way. But it doesn't mean we don't have access to that state of being and awareness and consciousness if we're not a Christian or we're not Catholic. So thank you. I think that was nice and juicy. So let's switch a little bit over to shamanism. You've had some beautiful mystical experiences, as I mentioned before, with your experiences in that realm. And can you tell us a little bit about your experiences with the Four Winds Society, I think it is? And what does it mean to be a Mesa carrier?
My daughter, she's 23 now. When she was three, I think. I was reading a book by Sue Monk Kidd called The Dance of the Dissident Daughter. And it was so appropriate for me because it was about growing up in a patriarchal religious tradition and leaving it to find more of a divine feminine experience. And I had read that book, and it was, and I decided to do a ceremony. So I took the kids to preschool. I drove into the Santa Cruz Mountains, into the Redwoods, and I did a ceremony where I fired my concept of God, the concept of God that I had grown up with. I bought an olive wood rosary, and I laid it in a stream, returning it to the earth. And I said, I cannot continue with this concept of a angry patriarchal God. And I don't know what my new concept of God is going to be, and I'm going to flap in the wind by myself until I can find it. But I'm done, right? So then I drive back to preschool to pick up the kids. I'm in the parking lot. I'm a couple minutes early, so I pick up a book I'm reading by Neil Donald Walsh, and I have tried to find this. I don't know which book it was, but I'll tell you what happened. I'm reading the book, and in it, Neil asks, because he's channeling God, right? he asks God, what would you say to the person who, I don't even remember what the question was, but the answer was, I would say to that person, you are my beloved child in whom I am well pleased. And I read those words and I felt like God was talking to me and I started to weep. I closed the book and I sat in the car in the parking lot and just cried. And when it was time to go in and pick up the kids, I was walking in and I thought to myself, I'm so glad that I did that ritual. And I heard this voice in my head say, so am I. And I felt that it was God talking to me. And it was shortly after that that I was introduced to the concept of shamanism, to this um, um, I was reading about the concept of soul loss, right? And soul retrieval and stuff like that. And somebody invited me to a talk by Alberto Villoldo, who's the founder of the Four Winds Society. And I said, sure. I had no idea who he was. But once I said I was going to go, in the days leading up to the talk, it was like things were just coming in. Articles would show up and his books would like fall at my feet. And, it was just, I was hearing his name over and over. And I thought, okay, I'm going. And he gave a talk, which was okay. It was August. It was hot. He was 20 minutes late. I was, wasn't that happy with him. But he said one thing in that talk that really struck me, like struck a gong in my head. And he said that the myths that a society holds inform how that society acts in the world, right? And he said, do you know, there are entire cultures on this planet that were never kicked out of the Garden of Eden. They don't hold that story. So they're not looking for redemption. They're not trying to, to get back in God's good graces. And then he said, what can you imagine if we had a creation myth in which God said, okay, God created the earth and then he created humanity. And then he said, I'm using the term he, loosely. But then God turned to humanity and said, I have created this world. You finish it. Create something beautiful. Can you imagine what we would be doing and how we would be treating each other if that was the story that was at the basis of our society, right? And so I thought, I need to learn how those people live, how they see the world, how they interact with nature. And so I, he said he had this school and it required, you had to go for a week at a time for 7 or 8 weeks over the course of 2 or 3 years. And I just thought, I don't know how I'm going to do that. Like I have little kids. My youngest was 3. And my husband didn't have that much vacation time, for me to be away. But I started seeing shamanic practitioners. I had a phone session with the woman who was the dean at the time at the Four Winds. And at the end of our session, she said, do you feel called to this work by chance? And again, I started crying. I'm like, yes, but I just don't know how am I going to make that happen? And she said, it's been my experience that when you put out to the universe that you want to do something, the universe will arrange itself to make it happen. And that's what happened. That's what happened. So I was able to train. So we'd go for these week-long intensives and then come back and you'd have a mentor over that time. And it was, I'm in the Silicon Valley, right, with toddlers, and I'm in the PTA. So it was a weird thing for me, really, to think about what does this look like? What does the practice of shamanism look like to a housewife in the Silicon Valley? And And I struggled with that identity, that like, what am I supposed to do with this? And this is why I think what you're doing is so important here, Anu, because um, hearing people's stories and hearing how people navigated things that they've never experienced before really helps other people. I read a book by Connie Browns, who is a pharmacist who apprenticed with a shaman in the Amazon for 27 years. And I loved that she married, she's a pharmacist, right? She's a scientist. And she married those two worlds. And that's because I was I'm a scientist. And I was wondering how that works. How do you put those together? I read another book by a woman in Santa Cruz called The Reluctant Shaman, who is grappling with the same thing. And it was just, it's so helpful to hear people's stories, you know? So, yeah, so you asked about the Mesa carrier. So in this tradition, the Carol are in the high mountains of the Andes, and they communicate with nature. It's very normal for them, and they use stones in their healing work. And so, in our training, we would gather stones and use them in the healing practices we were learning. And as there was a minimum of 12 that you kind of acquired over the course of the couple of years of training. And they represented different stages of training in the healing practices. So that when you got to the end of the training and your Mesa is a cloth bundle. It's kind of like a medicine bundle. When you finish with those 12 stones that are now your allies, you're called a full Mesa carrier.
Thank you for that. That's beautiful. And I love that you mentioned that's essentially that divine connection, that voice that came in when you were sitting in the church in your younger years, came in again later on in a different way. So you still have access to that divine connection, if you want to call it that. And yeah. And was the book you mentioned by Neil Donald Walsh, Conversations with God?
I don't know. I've gone through. I thought it was one called Home with God, but I've looked for it and I haven't found that the quote.
Okay, that's just.
I should go back. And see. It might be the first Conversations with God.
Well, it's just another beautiful synchronicity that here, Out on a Limb by Shirley MacLaine meant something deep and rich for you, and Conversation, and did for me as well. And Conversations with God, that whole series, especially the first book, was another just life changer for me. I think I've read that first book probably at least 10 times. And at that time I was traveling a lot. And so I ended up with like 4 different copies of the book. And they're all, every single one of them is all marked up and underlined and dog-eared and
Absolutely.
just incredible.
Just like speaks to your soul,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Judy. So let's move on here. And I would love to hear a little bit about your experiences with FMBR, the Foundation for Mind Being Research. And I think it's important to place that little pause in there so people understand. I'm not saying mine, it's Mind Being Research, where you're president.
Research.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit more about what FMBR is and what it does? It sounds like it's such a perfect entity for your path to have moved into.
Exactly right. It was founded in 1980 when people were talking about the mind-body connection, right? And the people who founded it, Bill Goff and a scientist, a healer, an artist, they came together to form this organization that, because they were interested in, they were saying it's not just mind body, right? It's more. It's a much bigger picture, and they came up with this hyphenated mind being, to describe beingness, and they were interested in exploring, I think, the nature of consciousness, right? The nature of human consciousness. At the time, and this was 45 years ago, um, they were talking about whether consciousness it arises from the brain or if it's somewhere else. Um, and they were also interested in things that couldn't necessarily be explained by the hard sciences, by scientific dogma. And so they wanted to, what they did is create a forum. It was once a month. They met in a fellowship hall of a church, and they would invite people who were doing research in these areas to come and talk about their work to an audience that was not going to dismiss them, because at the time, a lot of science was saying, well, those things can't happen because they don't fit in our worldview, and therefore things like spontaneous remissions, things like distance healing, things like communication after death communication, near death experiences, stuff like that. Science was saying, yes, we don't want to hear about it, But what they were saying is, a scientist is an explorer, right? A scientist looks at what's happening without a preconceived notion about what should be. And so for 40 years, we had people come and talk about the nature of reality, right? And so it was physicists and biologists, but also shamans, also healers. And it's just a great group of people. And then when the pandemic hit, like most people, we went online. Our meetings went to Zoom meetings, and we meet more often now. It's probably once or twice a month, and we just invite people who are doing work that I think really our focus now is on the evolution of consciousness, right? We are in extraordinary times. I think everybody feels it. Everybody knows that something's happening. We're in some sort of transition collectively, maybe even a collective initiation into a higher level of consciousness. And so we're exploring what tools, what tools people can use to help navigate these times, how to expand our worldview, how to grow into this greater sense of being and connection. So we have a lot of great people who come on and share their work, and there's a lot of great people who join us. Now, because we were on Zoom, we used to just be this little group in Palo Alto, and now we've got people joining us from all over the world, actually. So it's great fun. And I, when in the 80s, when I was going to the metaphysical bookstore, I found them because there was a flyer on the bulletin board announcing their meetings, and I thought, oh, science, consciousness, spirituality, that's kind of where I'm happiest. And so I started going to their meetings. I was, kind of fresh out of college when I started going. So, and I was off and on for many years.
And now you're president. That's really great. Yeah. So I think I started attending FMBR presentations maybe 10 years ago, something like that. And definitely enjoyed it. I mean, it's such a great resource, and it is wonderful that it's all available online now. So I'll mention at the end, how people can access that. So you've shared a lot about FMBR. I'm curious if maybe there might be one or two peak experiences you've had with a certain FMBR presenter that really stands out to you, or somebody. I would say, in my experience of FMBR, you've got everybody from sort of the way out woo-woo side of the spectrum, and I don't use the term woo-woo in a condescending way. To me, what woo-woo means is actually not W-O-O, it's W-U, meaning wake up, wake up, wake up. But the people on the woo-woo end are often like really kind of pushing the limits of what's accepted, especially in spiritual or religious realms. And like you're talking about, near-death experiences, channeling, the paranormal, all of those kinds of things. But anyway, to finish my thought, I think FMBR encompasses those types of presenters as well as people more on the spiritual, pragmatic, practical side. So again, my question is, is there any one or two presenters that your experience of their presentation or interacting with them like really stand out for you?
Yes. And you're right. It is a fine line to walk. You can get pretty out there with the woo-woo stuff, right? Which I love. Um, and I don't necessarily. I love to hear what people are doing. It may or may not resonate with me, but I love hearing people's research and what they're doing in the world. But as a scientist, I am kind of looking for some credibility, right? Some I don't know, something a little more grounded. Years ago, I didn't find the speakers for a long time. There was somebody else who did that. And we had this person who was coming to speak, and his name was Richard Unger. And he wrote a book called Life Prints. And it was about how the your fingerprints kind of tell something about your soul's journey, what you're here to do. And I thought, oh, for the love of God, we're doing palm reading now? Really? And I was kind of dreading it, right? And he came and gave this presentation that knocked my socks off. I mean, scientific, well-researched, well-documented, absolutely incredible. And he gave theories as to why he thinks this works. And so I was so taken by him that I went and had a reading with him, and it was absolutely enlightening. Um, and then I went back like 12 years later, maybe 15 years later, and had another reading just to see. And he said basically the exact same thing. So there's consistency across his system. So I've had a couple of times where we've had speakers where I was like, oh Lord, no, right? There was another guy, and I can't remember his name because it was a long time ago, who was coming to talk about electronic voice phenomenon. I don't know if you've heard that. That's a kind of communication with spirits through electronic devices, radios, voicemail machine, and that was another one where I thought, oh no, this is really, really woo-woo. And he gave his presentation that was, God, it was just cogent and clear and just well documented. Made the hair in the back of my neck stand up because I thought he played some recordings that, blew me away. And he wasn't trying to convince anyone. He said, this is my research. This is what I'm finding. I don't care if you believe it or not. I think a lot of times when people talk about phenomena that they can't really explain, they drop right into fear about it, and they like to stir up that fear, like, oh my God, isn't that scary? And I think that's a red flag for me. Anybody who's dropping into fear around anything, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to go there.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, FMBR is such a great sort of reflection of my goals with Soul Unique. I think where we're willing to look at all of these different perspectives and say, oh, that resonates with me and this doesn't, and that does, and how wonderful that you're doing that work. But we have a level of respect for all of it, with the idea that every point of consciousness, every person on the planet has their own, individual path, and how beautiful that is. So I'd just like to take a moment and just talk about a little bit about Soul Unique, and especially since this is the first Soul Unique podcast. So one of the premises of Soul Unique is that I believe that every person on the planet, as I said, could be called an individualized point of consciousness, perhaps even divine consciousness, as we said before. I also think it's clear that one of the basic tenets of our existence in our universe is diversity. It's everywhere, from the tiniest atomic and subatomic particles to the largest planets in our galaxy and beyond. So it seems reasonable to me to conclude that when each of us came forth from source, or from wherever we were before we were born into these magnificent bodies, that one of sources, or our intentions, would be that we would come forth and have our own unique individual experiences. So with that in mind, it could be said that organized or institutionalized religion is actually the antithesis of who we truly are as unique points of consciousness. And while I think the aspect of gathering in community is certainly beneficial and needed, the idea that there could be a one-size-fits-all approach to encompassing spirituality and the vast unknown has clearly never really worked, and frankly continues to be horrifically problematic today. So while there are many common truths to be found in all religions, and there is much to be learned from exploring the wisdom of the spiritual explorers, philosophers, and teachers who have gone before us from antiquity to the present day, I believe that forging our own personal spiritual paths that resonate uniquely and individually for each of us is our absolute birthright. Now, of course, the role that religion plays in our lives has changed dramatically over the centuries. One of the beautiful advantages that we have in our world today is that we essentially have a choice about how and if spirituality and religion have a place in our lives at all. And yet, even with how far we've come, the topic of religious and spiritual beliefs is still incredibly divisive in our world. So with all of that in mind, I'm curious if you have an opinion about the rather peculiar and very problematic, as we've seen and continue to see, human trait that when a person finds a spiritual path that truly resonates with them and makes them happy, makes them feel like they've touched or been touched by what could perhaps be called the divine, fills their soul with what feels like truth, why do so many in turn come to the conclusion that their way, their belief system must be the only way? So much so that some will go to great lengths to try to prove the beliefs and practices of other systems of thought as being evil or at least wrong and worthy of contempt, if not annihilation. So where do you think this comes from? Is this simply a psychological issue? Is it a fear that their method of spiritual connection could be perhaps taken away from them? I'd love to get your perspective on this.
I am of the belief that most of the issues, the challenges that we're facing today as societies, stem from a belief in separation. That we have taken on individually and collectively this belief that we are separate from each other, from the natural world, from the divine, and I think what happens when you have that belief, it's scary, right? You're kind of on your own, and you're competing, right? You're somehow like, oh, maybe someone's more connected than I am, or whatever, and it kind of creates hierarchy, right? So I've had this religious experience. I've been told what to do, right? And so now you have to do it my way because my experience is what everybody should be doing. It's an ego thing, right? Or there's two things. One, this is a failure to recognize that a lot of religions that have been started are based on one person or a few people's experience of the divine, right? Who then makes, this is the cookie cutter, this is what you have to do, which is just ridiculous, right? Everybody has to come to their expression of divinity on their own for the reasons you said, right? My other experience with people, especially in Christianity, my experience of Christianity. And when I was in college, for a semester, I also toyed with born again Christianity. There's a belief in an angry and punishing God. And a lot of the people that I was with that are proselytizing, that are trying to convert people, are fearful for other people. They're like, oh my God, this God is out to get you, and you have to believe this way, otherwise you're going to hell. And I'm trying to save you, right? I'm trying to make it so that you don't burn in hell. Which is lovely, but if you reject the premise that there is a hell or that there is a God that's going to punish you, it doesn't really work. So I think it's a belief in separation, a belief in an angry God. It's fear, right? It forces people into fear.
Yeah, and it seems when you pose it that way, it's also connected to their own fear for their own salvation, that if they don't sort of do what they feel they're being directed to do, to spread the teachings or save people, that they will not be saved. And we're just so ready for a time where where more and more truth and light needs to be brought to that misconception, what I believe is a complete misconception. I mean, we've seen over and over and over again, and we continue to do so, see how religious is tearing people apart and causing wars and destruction and death. And so thank you for sharing your perspective, Judy. Yeah. So I'm going to switch channels a little bit here and just ask if you could give advice to somebody seeking a deeper connection with themselves and with all that is, whatever you want to call that, spirituality, the divine, and if those terms don't resonate with someone, that's fine too. What would that advice be? So again, a deeper connection with themselves and a sort of understanding. Maybe, the questions I've always had, even since childhood, were I can remember being 5 years old, laying in bed, asking what I perceived to be some sort of presence that I was communicating with. Well, where was I before I was in this body, before I was born? Why am I here? And where do I go when it's over? And there was a part of me that just knew that what was being taught in Sunday school, because I was brought up in, at that time, Presbyterian and then later Methodist, but what was being taught just didn't resonate with me, even at that young age. So again, the question is, if you were to give advice to someone seeking a deeper connection, what would that be?
The very first thing is to get quiet, right? Is to kind of spend some time in quietness. But I think for people to, I don't know if this is hard for people, but to try on this idea that you mentioned, that you actually existed before you were in this body, and you will continue to exist after you leave this body. And that you are this spiritual being who chose to have a human experience, right? So you source from the divine. And I love that so much because it creates a whole different context, right? And what it says is that you are connected. You're deeply connected. You can't not be connected, right? Because your source is all that is. And so I love. I heard a quote a while ago. Someone said, we're not here to experience unconditional love, because unconditional love is where we came from. We're here to experience messy love, like love that we struggle with, love for the other. How do you increase your ability to love in a human body? So I just, to play with that idea that we are actually these vast spiritual beings who've come in with intention, right? We've incarnated into these bodies at this time on purpose, right? To be here at this time, to learn something, to grow somehow, to help maybe, to be of assistance, to alleviate suffering, and kind of just contemplate what that might be for you. What do you if that's true, just play with the idea. If that's true, what do you think it might be? And what would you be excited about if someone said, yeah, that's it?
Yeah, I think that's kind of that touches into the divine spark. Like, what really gets that excitement, that feeling of inspiration, and like, oh yeah, I got to check that out, or oh, I want to follow that path, or oftentimes that doesn't come with like the mind making sense of what that feeling is. It's that feeling is coming from soul or from somewhere else, higher self, whatever you want to call that, and that's such a great place to start, or a channel to follow.
Yeah. I had this great experience. I was working with Barbara Marx Hubbard in I don't know if she coined the phrase, but she was working with conscious evolution, the idea of conscious evolution. This idea that we've come to a point in our growth as a species where we can see that we've been evolving over time, and we can see that we're evolving still, and that we can choose what direction we want to evolve into, instead of just being kind of buffeted by circumstance. And I loved that so much. She was the first person I ever heard who held a positive vision for the future of humanity. And this was in the 80s, and everybody's talking about Armageddon and everyone's talking about the end of the world. And she was saying, no, these crises are a birth process. These are birthing pains. We're birthing a new way of being. And I was in a class with her, and we were kind of I was contemplating for a long, what's my purpose? What's my purpose? You know? And I had this thought, what if I don't have to seek it. I could just say what it is, right? Like it's not a game show where you have to guess, where if you just say, you know what? If an angel came down and said, this is your purpose, what would make me go, yes, I knew it, you know? And so I thought about it, and I came up with something, and I was on the phone with a bunch of people from the Center for Conscious Evolution. And we were asked to speak it out loud. And I was in my house. There was nobody in the house, but it seemed so heretical to say out loud that I knew what my purpose was, that I actually went and stood on the porch and kind of quietly said, my purpose in incarnating is to help birth and stabilize a new consciousness on this planet. And it was like every tumbler kind of came into place. All of my past experiences, all of my present experiences were in service to that. And I thought, oh my God, that's it.
Oh, that's so inspiring, Judy. Thank you. We're so in resonance. I love it. So how would you say, so if that's sort of the starting point, finding that spark of inspiration or excitement, how can someone, and perhaps also making a statement about, like, writing our own myth, what's my purpose? Stating an intentional purpose. And as long as that purpose, I would say, doesn't include harm to yourself or anybody else, go for it. That comes down to sort of one of the basics of Buddhist teachings about no harm, but that's another conversation. So again, starting from there, how can someone build a personal spiritual practice or their path, that evolves with them over time?
Well, I think you touched on it. I think you said it when you were talking about following that spark of what pulls you, what resonates, where you think, oh, that I'm feeling kind of called in this direction. I love the idea that the universe is, that concept of pronoia, opposite of the paranoia. Pronoia, that the universe is actually out to help you. And that things kind of come into your awareness that spark your interest or spark your curiosity or something like that. And to follow that with a joyful heart, knowing that you are loved and supported by the universe, right? So that, and for me, I ask myself, will this serve my soul's growth? And that way, it avoids me just kind of doing the things that are fun and easy, because sometimes things are challenging, right? If you want to grow and learn, things can get a little challenging. But if you feel like it's serving your growth, um, I think it's something to embrace with joy and curiosity, right?
Absolutely. The spiritual path does come with challenges because a lot of the spiritual path, I think, is sort of healing our misconceptions, healing our problems, sometimes illnesses, whether they be mental, emotional, or physical or spiritual. And that can be challenging, but it's so worth it. It's so worth it because of what that can open up for us when we go through that challenge. It's like the challenge becomes a conduit or a passageway through which we learn so much more about ourselves, and we bring in new wisdom, and we come out the other end a new person or have a new understanding, a new perspective.
Yeah, it really is just about gaining wisdom as you kind of go down the path of life. You gain wisdom through uh, through challenges and through joyful experiences, through all of it, right? It's all God. That's what I tell myself. It's all God.
Yeah, I used to study many years ago the teachings of Abraham Hicks, which is actually a channeled teaching, but it didn't matter to me whether it was channeled or not. It was just like I used to love to listen to those because they were so inspiring and there's so much good energy coming through. And one of their messages that I always remember is every bit of it worth it. Every bit of it worth it. Every bit of it worth it. The good, the bad, the up to down, the right, the left, it's all with great purpose and it all has a place on our path.
Absolutely. I am 100% in agreement. I have heard many spiritual teachings and many channel teachings say, what a gift it is to be in a body with all of it, with all of the challenges, with all of the this density that we have to contend with. It's all a gift.
Yeah. Okay, so here's kind of a fun question. I think, what's your all-time favorite spiritually oriented and inspiring book, or maybe a couple books? Because I'm sure you've read a lot.
Oh yeah, I mean, there are a lot. You mentioned channel teachings. I am struck by the amount of channeled work that's available right now. Really high quality, high frequency, high vibration channeled teachings that are coming through. I think we're we have resources, right? We have spiritual masters who are helping, um, and so there's a series. There's a guy named Paul Selig who is channeling Melchizedek, and he has a series of books. Probably 13 or 14 by now. I've read them all. And there was a book in the series called The Book of Love and Creation. I think it was the fourth or fifth in the series that I listened to an audiobook probably 4 times in a row, just on repeat, because this is a handbook for ascension. I thought, I loved it so much. I thought these were super high vibration teachings. And then, early on, I think Shambhala, The Path of the Peaceful Warrior was a huge one. Dan Millman's book, The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, was another one that was, back in the 80s or 90s. Yeah, but I think the channeled works that are coming through right now are just very high vibration works.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Yeah, I don't know of the Paul Selig books, so I'm going to have to check those out myself. Definitely.
It's good stuff.
Yeah. So, are there any red flags people should be aware of when exploring different spiritual paths, communities, teachings, or even teachers that you might be able to point out for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that asks you to give up your sense of agency or to deny your lived experience, or that tells you you have to do things a certain way, according to the guru or whatever, anything that doesn't point you inward is a red flag, right? Because as gurus have said for thousands of years, the answers are all inside, right? It's not about finding anything out there. So you're looking for teachers who can help you find and embrace your own divinity. So anything that's serving someone's ego or having you, you know, um, subject yourself to them, super big red flag.
And with that in mind, how would you say spiritual practitioners forging their own unique spiritual paths can avoid falling into the same pitfalls as practitioners in institutionalized religion?
I would, when I was at the Four Winds, one of the things that they repeated often was the importance of doing your own work all the time, right? And they called it keeping it clean. So you want to be aware of what hooks you, what are your triggers, what is your own shadow work, so that you can own it, so that you're not projecting it out. It's a practice. It's a continual practice, right? To really kind of be able to see where you're tempted to react in a habitual way that's unconscious, right? You go into anger, you go into ego, or you get all puffed up, especially if people are healers or teachers and they kind of start thinking, oh, I know, I'm going to tell you, that's any lack of humility. I think if you start feeling a lack of humility, or that you got it going on, that's a red flag. It's something to explore and to do some work around.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's so important that we continue doing our own work, as we go along, especially people who are becoming teachers and guides. There's always more. And I think it's also important to point out that awakening is never done. I know some people who consider themselves awakened, and they kind of act like, and so I'm all perfect and you can't question me, and it's like, no. Awakening is an yes, people, I think you could say they reach stages of awakening where they've sort of transformed something that was problematic or difficult in their previous life, and they transformed through that in a way, and that was an awakening. But now there's a whole journey left to continue, and it's never done.
Yeah, and I think I think people's they get to this idea of being enlightened or awakened, and they're like, oh, I am the divine, I am God, I'm God manifest. Okay, that's true, but so is everyone else, right? So is everyone else, and so is this water bottle, and so is the refrigerator. It's like everything arises out of the field of divinity. It's God is in everything, and so that's one of my mantras especially if I'm feeling anxious or worried or angry. I I just go back to this too is God. This too is God. This is an expression of the divine in a form that I might be judging, but that's on me, right? It's all God.
So as we wrap this up, I've got one more question for you. And what's a simple but powerful shift someone could make today, perhaps as a result of listening to this podcast, to feel more spiritually aligned?
One of my favorite practices is super easy. You can do kind of even sitting in the car. It's to, and you see it a lot in various ways, is to imagine a cord of light that comes out of the base of your spine and connects into the heart of the earth, and then also connects out the top of your head to the center of the galaxy, right? And what that does is it says you are the bridge between heaven and earth, right? I do this sitting in a red light. You are the bridge between heaven and earth, and you are needed, but also just beloved of the earth, beloved of spirit, right? And it changes the way I walk in the world, right? From in my early days, thinking that I would never be good enough for God to love me, right? To say now I am an expression of the divine. I am beloved, and I'm connected to the earth. The earth loves me. I love, it's a shift in context that takes away a lot of anxiety for me.
I love that. Thank you so much, my friend. Thank you so much, Judy. It's been such a joy to talk with you today. Really appreciate your being here. I did mention before that you're actually in London. So hopefully that won't cause any problems in audio or video quality. But as far as I can tell, it's all good and came through beautifully. Especially your presence and your answers and all that you shared here. I really appreciate having this conversation with you so much. You're such the perfect person to be on my first podcast.
I'm so grateful. And like you said, this is absolute joy. This is, this is the stuff I love to talk about. And I'm just so grateful for the opportunity to be here. And of course, like you said, we resonate so well. I think we have a very similar worldview. And so it just feeds my soul to connect with you and tell these stories. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Judy. So if you'd like more information about Judy's organization, the Foundation for Mind Being Research, check out fmbr.org. And they also have a YouTube channel, FMBR TV, where you can watch many or maybe all of their guest speakers' presentations for free. And you can check it out again on YouTube at FMBR TV. So in a moment, I will be back with a short recap of my conversation with Judy, where I'll pinpoint the resources, suggestions, and guidance that Judy shared in a way that will make it as easy as possible for you to take whatever you might have been inspired by or that you found interesting and use it to help you in navigating your own personal spiritual path. Thank you so much for being here. Oh, that was a great conversation with Judy. I really enjoyed that, and I want to thank her for her time and all that she shared. I hope you found it as inspiring as I did. Now, before you go, here are the details of everything we talked about, so that if you feel so inspired to read one of the books or get more information on anything that we mentioned, it's easy for you to do so. These will also be posted in the notes beneath the video version of this podcast episode on YouTube. So at the very beginning of our conversation, Judy mentioned that she is currently studying the Bhagavad Gita, which is a Hindu scripture dated to the 2nd or 1st century BCE. And we didn't get to talk about that beyond that first mention of it, but perhaps we will in a future episode. In her shamanic training, Judy received initiation rites from elders of the Karo Nation and studied shamanic practices through the Four Winds Society with Alberto Villoldo. I think the Four Winds Society is now located in Florida, and their website is thefourwinds.com. The Karo Nation, that's spelled Q''ERO, refers to a Quechua-speaking indigenous community living in the Peruvian Andes Mountains. The Karo are often considered to be the last direct descendants of the Inca people and are known for preserving their ancient traditions and their deep connection to nature. They truly are a beautiful people, and I'm actually going to be in Peru this spring for an extended period, and I hope to have the opportunity to study with some of the Karo in Peru's magnificently beautiful Sacred Valley. And now I'm going to give you a list of the books that were mentioned so you can track them down if you like. We talked about Out on a Limb, which was written in 1983 by none other than the wonderful Shirley MacLaine. And as both Judy and I mentioned, this book was pivotal for us both in our spiritual paths. Judy mentioned a book called The Dance of the Dissident Daughter by Sue Monk Kidd, Kidd, which was published in 1996. We also talked about the Conversations with God book series by Neale Donald Walsch. And the first book of the series, which is simply called Conversations with God Book 1, was released in 1995 and was a huge mind and heart-opening step forward on Judy's path as well as on mine. Judy also mentioned a book by a woman named Connie Grouds, and that's G as in good, Rauds. Connie is the pharmacist who apprenticed for 20 years in the Amazon that Judy mentioned. And the full title of the book is Jungle Medicine: From Medicine to Magic, published in 2004. Judy also talked about a book called The Reluctant Shaman by Kay Cordell Whitaker, which was published in 1991. She also mentioned a book by Richard Unger, Unger, called Life Prints: Deciphering Your Life Purpose from Your Fingerprints, which was published in 2007. Judy has inspired me to start reading the series of channeled books that she mentioned by Paul Selig, and I'm going to order my first book to read from the series, which is the book that Judy mentioned was so powerful for her, The Book of Love and Creation, which was published in 2012. And you can find all these books at paulselig.com. She also mentioned a book from the world of Buddhism called Shambhala, The Sacred Path of the Warrior, by Chogyam Trungpa. That's Trungpa, which was published in 2015. And I'd like to add here that Buddhism is really not a religion per se. It doesn't have gods or angels of any kind, or creation myths or stories, or even belief systems. It's actually more of a beautifully rich and eloquent philosophy and way of life. A path of inner inquiry as well as information and instruction for how to navigate the world around us. I don't consider myself a Buddhist necessarily, but I deeply appreciate many of the Buddhist teachings, and I've used them to navigate my own path. Lastly, we mentioned a book with a similar title as the Shambhala book. It's called Way of the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Millman, which was published in 1980. And Judy and I also talked about a number of methodologies and concepts, which I will review briefly here. She mentioned electronic voice phenomenon, which is also known simply as EVP. And if or when we're able to find the name of the FMBR presenter who spoke about EVP so impressively, I will add that to the notes on the YouTube version of this episode. But in the meantime, you can find out plenty about EVP simply by searching for it on the web. And Judy mentioned the wonderful Barbara Marx Hubbard, who was a visionary futurist and an inspiring author and public speaker. Barbara passed this plane in 2019, but her work is still very active and valid in today's world. Actually, perhaps it's needed more than ever. And you can check out her Foundation for Conscious Evolution at barbaramarxhubbard.com. And during my conversation with Judy, I mentioned the Buddhist principle of no harm. In Buddhism, it is called ahimsa, Ahimsa, and it's the first of the 5 moral precepts in Buddhism. We also talked about pronoia versus paranoia. Pronoia is a state of mind where one believes that the world is conspiring to help them, which of course is the opposite of paranoia, where someone believes others or perhaps the world is conspiring against them. I propose that we bring the concept of pronoia more into our lives, for our beliefs and what we expect from life do have an impact on how life unfolds and shows up for us. I also mentioned the concept, every bit of it worth it, every bit of it worth it, every bit of it worth it, in our conversation, and that comes from the inspiring and upbeat teachers Abraham Hicks, Abraham-Hicks, and you can find more about them at abraham-hicks.com if you like. And lastly, from our conversation, Judy mentioned shadow work. And shadow work is a meaningful practice of self-inquiry that was developed by famed psychoanalyst Carl Jung. It's a process of exploring and accepting the parts of yourself that you've repressed or ignored. It can help you understand yourself better, improve relationships, and help you to learn healthy coping mechanisms. And finally, I'd like to add something that Judy mentioned to me after our conversation. She wanted to make it clearer that her experiences with Catholicism were and are, of course, her own. She told me she knows a lot of people who have had beautiful, nurturing experiences growing up in the church. Of course, as we discussed, that was not her experiences, and she acknowledges that many people share her challenging experiences, but she also recognizes that others do not. And she just wanted to be sure that came through. So I hope this recap of takeaways from my conversation with Judy Kitt is helpful for you as you continue navigating your own path. I truly believe and have experienced that when we allow ourselves the freedom to uncover, nurture, and forge our own personal spiritual paths, it can be one of, if not the most exciting and meaningful adventures of our lives, because we're doing it all on our own terms. And as you know by now, I am heralding the spiritual path that has nothing to do with institutionalized religion. While I do believe there are many sound principles that can be found in all or most institutionalized religions, and there are plenty of good takeaways and nuggets of truth in there, the truest, most personal path we can take as individualized points of consciousness, having our own unique perspective and life experience, is doing it on our own terms. In my work as a wellness practitioner, facilitator, healer, and counselor, it's become very clear to me that for so many people, the journey of personal inquiry and exploration into what it's all about from a broader perspective, truly what is going on here as we navigate our temporary lives on this little blue dot floating in space. Whether you call it spiritual or not, that journey has been the answer that has filled a big gap where something was missing and enabled them to move from inner turmoil, unhappiness, and perhaps even confusion to a sense of inner peace and clarity that radiates into every area of their lives. Now, this path is not for everybody. I fully recognize that. But if it might resonate with you in some way, why not go for it? Even if you start by just dipping your toe in, as Abraham Hicks would say, every bit of it worth it. So thank you so much for listening today. I hope you'll continue to tune in to Soul Unique episodes in the future. I'm wishing you well and sending you highest vibes as you continue to navigate your life, and yes, perhaps even your own personal spiritual path. Thank you for being here.